Hey listeners, before we begin, a quick note. The FEMA nationwide test of the emergency alert system and wireless emergency alert system that we discussed in this episode was originally planned for September 20th. That's now been moved to October 3rd. Welcome to More Than 7 Dirty Words, the official FCC podcast. I'm Evan Swartztraber, your host. On January 13th, 2018, at 8:07 a.m. local time in Hawaii, a ballistic missile defense drill went awry, and the following message went out all over Hawaii. This is in all caps. Ballistic missile threat inbound to Hawaii. Seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill. This false alert caused 38 minutes of panic, and it took about 13 minutes for the first correction to appear on social media and 38 minutes for the first alert to go out over the wireless emergency alert and emergency alert system. Now, this was obviously a big mistake, but what was the FCC's response to the Hawaii incident? And more broadly, given the FCC's role in public safety, what should listeners know about wireless emergency alerts and the emergency alert system? And what efforts are underway at the agency to update these systems? Well, joining me to discuss all of that and more is Lisa Folks, Chief of the FCC's Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. Lisa, thanks so much for joining the show.
Thank you for having me.
So to start out, what exactly was the FCC's response when this missile alert went out?
The FCC immediately commenced an investigation, which included sending 2 investigators to Hawaii to talk to the various stakeholders involved, representatives of Hawaii's emergency management agency, service providers such as broadcast stations, equipment vendors who provide alerting initiation equipment to government agencies. We also talked to other government alert initiators in other parts of the country to find out what they were doing in terms of their standard operating procedures, how they would handle a false alert, and basically to learn what safeguards are out there.
And then specifically to this incident, do we know exactly what the mistake was and how such a catastrophic error happened?
Well, it turns out that Hawaii really did not have good procedures in place to issue an alert, and particularly what to do if a false alert was issued. There was also some human error problems. For example, Hawaii, under the process that Hawaii had, you basically had one person who would issue the alert. There was really there wasn't second person validation of the message before it went out the door.
So if one person makes a mistake, there's not that backstop there.
Right.
You know, almost like in the movies where you have 2 people that have to turn a key at the same time
right,
to protect
exactly.
against error.
And then what complicated that and what contributed to the 38-minute delay to issue an alert correcting the false alert is that Hawaii Emergency Management did not have procedures in place that anticipated what would they do if there was a false alert. How would they correct it? What are the processes for getting it out over the emergency alert system or the wireless emergency alerts?
And what really struck me about this was just the words, "this is not a drill." Because
Exactly.
all of us are so accustomed to fire drills and all sorts of tests and, preparedness and a lot. And thank God, most of the time we're just testing and we're preparing. We're not actually faced with a disaster. But then when you see those words, in our culture, it's just this embedded notion of it's for real.
Exactly.
And it's hard to imagine, I wasn't there. And if you weren't in Hawaii and you didn't get that alert, it's hard to imagine what would go through your head in a situation like that. Mm-hmm. Pretty powerful stuff. But it might be some comfort to know that there are efforts underway to improve the wireless emergency alert system. And you've, I heard, been working on alerts for, 14 years now?
Yes.
At the FCC?
Yes.
That's pretty remarkable. So, and this is obviously an extreme example in Hawaii, and there was some localized human error there. But the wireless emergency alert system is a lot more than just missile alerts.
Right.
People might be familiar with flash flood warnings on a phone. I've been in a coffee shop, and everyone's phone goes off at the same time. And you're like, oh, I guess we're all getting a flood warning. Or maybe before cell phones, it was the emergency alert system where you were up late at night watching some bizarre infomercial and your screen turned black and you got the alert. So that might be how people are familiar with the system,
Right.
and there are always efforts to improve it and modernize it. So, what do we have going on here at the agency in regards to these systems?
Well, with respect to wireless emergency alerts, and this is the system where consumers can receive emergency alerts over their cell phones. And so long as one, their wireless carriers participating in wireless emergency alerts, the consumer has a wireless emergency alert capable phone, and they are in the targeted area.
Right.
And the good thing about the wireless emergency alerts, which sets it apart from some of the subscription-based alerting systems that a lot of governments use, is that wireless emergency alerts sending the alert involves targeting to a specific area based on cell towers. The cell towers broadcast the alert to a certain targeted area. And if you're in the area that's served by that cell tower, then if all the other things that I've mentioned are true, you should get the alert. So what this means is that a government agency that's issuing an alert will not only touch the people that live in the targeted area, but if you're a tourist and you happen to be in that targeted area, you may get that alert as well. Some of the challenges that we've seen since it was launched in April 2012, the biggest one has been geographic targeting. When the commission initially adopted rules, it basically set up geo-targeting so that it was county-based. Now, if you have a county that's relatively small, that might not be such a problem. But what we were finding is that there are a lot of states that really have these gigantic counties. And if you're trying to target an alert to a county that's that large, then you end up sending an alert to people where the situation really doesn't apply to them, and it causes confusion. So one of the things that the FCC has focused on is trying to have more granular geo-targeting. So the Commission's current rules say that the carrier must be able to geo-target based on its best approximation of the target area. The Commission has rules that will take effect next year that will require that the targeted area be no more than 1/10 a mile from the target area.
That's a lot more precise, and
Yes.
I guess that gets right at the issue of kind of the boy who cried wolf problem, which
Right.
I think's been identified, where if you're constantly getting alerts that don't apply to you,
Right.
you're eventually going to ignore the one that matters.
Exactly.
And that's what we want to make sure that when people get these alerts, they're paying attention.
Exactly. Other areas of improvement that we've been focused on is providing government agencies the ability to provide more information in the alert. When the rules were originally adopted, it called for a limit of 90 characters, which that's a pretty short alert.
It's less than a tweet.
Yes, yes. And so one of the rules that the Commission adopted was to expand that 90 characters to 360 characters. And that's another improvement that will become effective next year. Another improvement is that we will be requiring the carriers, the wireless service providers, to support alerts in Spanish. We've also adopted rules that are in effect now that require wireless service providers to support alerts with a clickable URL. So that means if I get an alert and there's a link, I should be able to click on it and go to that link. We're still looking at other improvements, such as whether to require support for additional languages other than Spanish and English, whether to support multimedia-based alerts.
That might involve like videos of an area or
Yes.
photos that could get very specific, or to show the danger, which might get people a little bit more, kind of get them into gear in terms of responding.
Yes.
Now, just so I have this right, while the alerts are being sent out over the cell networks, and it does involve the companies, they're not the ones who decide to send out an emergency alert, right?
No. Government agencies make that decision. So One type of alert that can be issued over this system is the presidential, which would be handled by FEMA. The National Weather Service handles weather alerts, and they actually are responsible for most of the alerts that you see, not just on wireless emergency alerts, but on the broadcast-based emergency alert system. This system can be used to issue Amber Alerts, and in fact, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children reported that wireless emergency alerts has been directly responsible for the recovery of over 50 children
That's remarkable.
since it was went operational. State and local governments can also issue these alerts. For example, some cities have used wireless emergency alerts to issue shelter in place or evacuation alerts.
Well, that's pretty remarkable. It's easy to focus on the shortcomings, but when you hear that over 50 children have been recovered, I mean, that's pretty remarkable. And I also see that over 35,000 of these alerts have been sent.
Well, it's now about 40,000.
Oh, wow. All right. Well, maybe that's 4,000 since I wrote up these these notes. So actually, it's interesting that we're doing this show now. We're recording on September 12th. I'm not sure exactly when you'll be listening to this, listener, but at least currently there's a plan for a big event on September 20th
Yes.
in regards to the emergency alert system and the wireless emergency alert system. Is this a nationwide test that we're going to experience?
Yes, this is a nationwide test of both the broadcast emergency alert system and the cell phone wireless emergency alerts. This is actually the fourth nationwide test that FEMA has conducted with respect to the broadcast-based EAS. This will be the first nationwide test for wireless emergency alerts. So on September 20th, we may hear a lot of cell phones going off all over the place.
Yeah, and just make sure this one actually is a drill.
It is a test, and it will be clear that it is a test.
Yeah, so no need to freak out there, listeners.
Exactly.
We're just testing here. So, you mentioned that next year new rules will be taking effect. I mean, what else should the listeners be looking out for, in terms of wireless emergency alerts? I mean, we've seen the devastation with the hurricanes in Puerto Rico, in Houston. I mean, wildfires in California. It seems like these days on the news there's always something going on. And, if you're listening to this show, what should you be looking out for as we move forward? Are you the day where you see over 300 characters instead of 90, or are there other things that people should be aware of?
Basically, it is they will see longer messages with the 360. Some people who speak Spanish and not English, or Spanish is their primary language, you should see more alerts in Spanish. They should also hopefully see more targeted alerting, so that if the consumer gets the wireless emergency alert, they can feel more comfortable that the alert does apply to them. One of the goals of our changes to geographic targeting was that the consumer gets more alerts that relate to them and fewer of those that don't.
Right. And then, of course, before cell phones, we had the emergency alert system, which deals with broadcast television, cable television.
Yes.
Are there any efforts ongoing there, or is that working fairly well? One thing I wanted to note is that, sometimes in disasters, depending on which communications infrastructure is impacted, those are the ones that might be online if the cell phones go down.
Exactly.
So is there anything people should be aware of in terms of, their over-the-air alerts through radio or over-the-air television, or their cable television or satellite television?
One of the things that we have been working with FEMA and emergency managers on are best practices to assist government agencies that issue these alerts, so that they can issue better alerts. They have processes in place to mitigate the possibility of issuing a false alert. So that's certainly one of the areas that we have been focused on. Another thing that people should look out for, and this applies to the broadcast-based system as well as wireless emergency alerts, is that the Commission has adopted rules that establish what's called blue alerts. And these alerts would be issued in cases where a law enforcement officer has been killed or is injured or missing, and it is believed, it's been confirmed that the perpetrator is in the targeted area. And the idea there is not only to say to the people to receive the alert, be careful, there's this person there that has already caused harm to a law enforcement officer, but also if you see this person, here's what you need to do, whether it's take cover or this is how you can get information to law enforcement. So that's another big change that they should see.
Well, as we see all these technologies coming down the pike, whether it's faster internet, next generation wireless 5G, next generation TV, aka ATSC 3.0, or all the shiny new gadgets, they always have implications for our economy, or maybe they're fun to use, or new games and new work applications. But it's always important to remember that with every technological advance in the communication sphere, there is a potential to improve public safety.
Yes.
And I'm glad to be able to interview you about that as we move towards better emergency alerts, whether it's over your cell phone, over the air, or over cable, or whatever technology we're using. So thanks so much for joining me. My guest has been Lisa Folks, Chief of the FCC's Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Well, make sure to find this podcast wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's in the iTunes Store, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher. We're available. And if you like what you hear or you don't, feel free to write us a review. We're happy to hear feedback, and that will help others find the show. So thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.